Hello, Charles. Welcome.
Thank you, Alon. It's a pleasure to be here in Israel today.
Yeah, pleasure to be with you again. And we have a busy week coming up with the Teammate CISO Summit. So thanks for joining us. For those that are less familiar, Charles has been a CISO for the last probably 20, 25 years in multiple banks, and your last role was actually head of global security, information security for Citibank, and now part of the Teammate community and the CISO-in-Residence. So really appreciate your willingness to interview here.
No, thank you. It's my pleasure. Duality is one of my favorite companies, so it's a pleasure to talk to you today.
Excellent. So you recently actually wrote a very interesting CISO to CISO blog talking about the change of the CISO role to become a business enabler. Can you tell us what really compelled you to write this blog now? And since it talks a lot about privacy enhancing technologies, how did you even get familiar to that space?
So the reason I wrote the blog now is because having stepped away from being an operational CISO for 20 some odd years, it gave me an opportunity to sort of reflect on what I've been seeing. And I put this whole sort of theory together about the evolving nature of the CISO. And I think one of the most critical pieces of that is that over time, the CISO's gone from sort of a controls person to a risk person, now to a business person. And so I thought it was very important, especially as we're getting ready for RSA and the CISO Summit, to help put a view out there about how that role has been evolving.
Interesting. So if I really call out specifically, you're writing your blog, while all good CISOs today are making sure all of the necessary controls are in place. The best of CISOs are not stopping there. The best CISOs are more than just risk and control people, and they are true business enablers.
Yeah.
So can you really take us a little bit more into the details? What do you actually mean by that, and how is the role actually changing?
So there are a couple of pieces to that. First, for a CISO to really be successful, everything about a security program has to be in the context of the business. And I think for too long, CISOs were very theoretical about what they were doing, as opposed to really grounding it in whatever the business is that they were. They're a bank, they're an entertainment company, whatever. You have to sort of ground how you think about security in that business. And as you do that, what it does is give you an opportunity to think about, are there ways that you can actually leverage cyber, not just to protect the business, but to enhance the business, right? Can you actually not be viewed as a cost center anymore? Can you be viewed as something that is actually enhancing the value of the organization, enhancing the value of what you deliver to your clients? And I think that's where the CISO's role needs to evolve. To the second part of your question about privacy enhancing technologies, to me, that became really interesting because it's one of those areas where a CISO does have the opportunity to impact more than just controls. It's an opportunity for a CISO to come in and talk from a business perspective about business values and new potential business values that didn't exist before these technologies existed.
It's really also a mind shift, because typically security people are the people that say no and protecting and limiting, and you actually talking about enabling something and opening up. So it's beyond really just the role. It's just change of the.
But I think part of that also has to go back to this evolving nature of the role. When you were a controls person, it was very easy that your first reaction was no. All right. As a risk person, that's not a good first reaction. As a risk person, your first reaction should be yes, that's inside of our risk tolerance, or no, but let's figure out how to help the business do what they need to do in a way that they manage the risk. All right. But now it's about let's figure out ways how to help the business make more money. And that is where I think there is this excitement about the changing nature of the role. it's a lot harder to be in a job that's just defending an organization all the time. It's a constant wearing thing. But if you can actually change the nature of the role where you're contributing to the organization in a more positive way, I think that just makes your job so much more rewarding. And so all of that has to be part of the evolving role.
So taking this actually maybe to the next level, we've been working with Gartner a lot, and they've coined this term, a data-driven enterprise, where they talk about organizations using data beyond liking a point solution or for a specific business unit to really a much more broader and wide strategy around really transforming the organization and operating in a much more data-centric way, where basically this requires to break down data silos, to really work with third parties and so on. So in this journey for this data-driven enterprise, what is the CISO's role there?
Yeah, so I think the data-driven enterprise is actually a perfect example of that evolving role. Because if you think about the CISO's job, in the old world, like if I used to think about like at a bank, in the old world, the security person's job was guard a vault that had actual money in it, right? The modern CISO is guarding an IT organization where money is bits and bytes, right? So you've got this sort of guarding thing happening. And that's been the culture around data. But when we think about business enablement, this is a great opportunity for a CISO because a lot of data in an enterprise has been locked up because there was a regulatory issue, a privacy issue, a paranoia issue around leaking of confidential data and secrets and the like. And so enterprises were never really able to maximize the value of the information they have. If you think about the evolution of the role, you think about the emergence of privacy-enhancing technologies, it now gives the CISO an opportunity to sit down with a business person and say, all this data that we used to say is off limits because of some reason, we now have a way to allow you to extract value from it. Whether it's extracting value for your own use, or whether it's extracting value by creating a way to monetize that data, you have this whole opportunity. And so as you have this data-driven enterprise, historically the enterprise had a chunk of its data locked up, and now the CISO's got the opportunity to unlock all that data and to allow for the data-driven enterprise to really maximize its value.
Really like that vision. Now, if we look specifically at the CISO's kind of classical job around really the security side, and we all believe that this data-driven enterprise is using data across all roles. So if we look at the CISO's specific kind of classical security angle, how can he leverage this ability to collaborate more freely and break down data silos? How does that really help the day-to-day work of a CISO?
So most of what we've talked about is how a CISO is helping his business partners or her business partners. The reality is this also, like you're saying, can help a CISO. So as a CISO, I've always been a very big believer in this whole idea of collective defense, all right? Whether it's the FSI, SAC, and creating ISACs, or intelligence sharing in cyber and fraud and anti-money laundering. A lot of that collaboration has always been made more difficult by privacy regulation, and legitimately so. I mean, the reason for privacy laws in most countries has got a very solid underpinning. I would prefer my data to be kept private. But those privacy laws have had a chilling effect on being able to use data for allowing banks, where I'm coming from, to collaborate on things like cyber intelligence sharing, fraud intelligence sharing. And so with the advent of the privacy-enhancing technologies, you now have ability to allow inter-organizational collaboration at a much higher level. And as a believer in collective defense, as a CISO, I think that's really important, right? If I can share with other banks, if two different CISOs in pharmaceutical companies can collaborate with each other on how they defend themselves, all the while protecting their confidential data, all the while protecting the PII, that's a huge enhancement for the CISO. And so it's very much in the CISO's best interest to do it, but you don't sell it that way. You start selling it by how the business gets value of it. You can then be the second user for how you get value of it.
So this kind of idea of really the ability to share and work on data and protect it at the same time is really fascinating. And you actually go into quite a lot of detail in your blog, and there's different types of privacy enhancing technologies. And I think like the two key messages you have there is, one, there's a lot of different types of pets, but you have to choose the right pet for the right use case. And another key thing is that you do put homomorphic encryption at some other level and you say it actually requires immediate attention currently. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So yeah, there are a couple of pieces to that. The first is with any new sort of space and technology, you as a CISO have to sort of be very careful in managing your risk about technology adoption. You want products and companies that have a long-term play, and they're going to provide long-term value. So you have to be careful because, especially early on with a new technology, there are a lot of claims made. I think about like the Old West when people talked about snake oil, the guy selling the medicine that's really snake oil. And so what I'm telling CISOs is, this is a space you have to study and understand, all right? It's not an overly simple space. It's pretty complicated, quite honestly, and so you have to really dig into it. You want to think about what your use cases are, all right? Because different use cases may lend themselves better to different pets, different kinds of privacy-enhancing technologies. I think there are some common characteristics that are really important. As much as possible, you want products that are standards-based. All right, because the process by which cryptographic algorithms get reviewed to become sort of standardized gives you a lot more comfort about the integrity of the algorithms versus someone's homegrown algorithms that haven't had any sort of external review. I think you want to think about companies or solutions once you start to think about your use cases. Do you have a very narrow set of use cases? So maybe there's one specific product that'll work for you. Do you have a broad set of use cases where you may want a different class of product that's maybe a little bit more flexible? And so all of these, I think, are considerations that a CISO needs to understand as they consider what things to research, what products to buy.
I definitely subscribe to the fact that any encryption technology, at least, has to be not only standardized, but even open source, because that's basically the only way to understand what's going on there.
Yeah, no, and people are always I always get this interesting reaction from people that don't necessarily understand the space, where they talk about how the encryption algorithms need to be secret in order to keep the encryption secret. And I keep trying to explain to people that the encryption algorithms have to be sort of public and scrutinized. What you have to keep secret is your keys. But if you're not necessarily technical, you won't necessarily understand how to sort of separate that. And so you're right. Open source, reviewed algorithms, especially as we think about becoming quantum proof algorithms in this space, lattice-based algorithms. So it'll take the CISO a little bit of a deeper understanding to sort of dig into this space. But it is imperative, all right? It's imperative because of the fact that the constraints from things like privacy and regulation are getting tighter, all right? And it's imperative for businesses to find new ways to drive efficiency, drive revenue. And it's imperative for a CISO to become an enabler of the business. And there are not that many opportunities for CISOs to be enablers. Most of the opportunities for CISOs are keep you out of trouble. When you find that rare opportunity for a CISO to come in and say, here, we can actually change the nature of the business. And, oh, by the way, we can be more secure. You don't need to necessarily know about that. That is what's imperative, because it's this rare opportunity to get out there and make your mark as a CISO, as an enabler. And I think that's critical for all CISOs.
I really like that. So if we even look at it in a broader aspect, so we've always, for many years, we had a CIO and we had a CISO, and now in the recent years, definitely large enterprises are bringing in, of course, chief privacy officers, chief compliance officers, chief data officers. So it seems like there's a whole new C-suite around this information or data or the management on it, the ability to protect and collaborate on it. So this is basically, a whole new suite. What do you think really is the CISO's place in this new suite, and is he really leading the pack there?
So I always view it as collaborative, not necessarily any one of those people leading the pack. If anything's leading the pack, it should be the business person. The CISO, the chief privacy officer, the chief data officer, the chief information officer. We are all there in support of a business mission. So if any one is going to lead, it's the business. But when you get to that group, you really have this opportunity to really have a collaborative way of thinking. The chief data officer usually is trying to think about, first of all, where is all my data, all right? And do I know what all my data is, and how do I extract value of it? The chief privacy officer is taking a slice of that and saying some rules around how to protect it. The chief privacy officer will turn to the CISO and say, I'll take care of all this regulatory stuff. You just make sure the data is protected, right? So even when it comes to privacy, the chief privacy officer and the CISO have a very tight relationship because the chief privacy officer has to rely on the CISO on the data protection piece. And so what I think is you're seeing sort of this more collaboration happening as you have these other roles get formed around how we think about data. I've always been a big believer that collaboration is good. I think people create more interesting ideas when they're collaborating. And so there's an opportunity to think about data in a broader sense with all these sort of new roles coming into being.
Yeah. Interesting analogy between the collaboration of the C-suite or this new C-suite and this kind of driver that PET allows you to do what's collaborative data in a much more responsible way.
Yeah, collaboration is the key word, right?
Responsible collaboration, I would say.
On the data side, it's not always quite as responsible inside of a corporation because politics sometimes comes in, personalities sometimes come in. When on data is easier. Data's easier. Data doesn't require humans. Yeah. Humans consume data, but it's easier that way. But yeah, CISOs to be successful have to be collaborative by their very nature. Sure. All right. Whether you're thinking about an old-fashioned CISO that's just trying to manage controls, or you're thinking about a modern-age CISO that's trying to enable the business, both of those cases, to be successful, require a person who's very good at collaborating, right? And so collaboration is the center.
Yeah. So Charles, really, thank you very, very much for this, especially with this very busy week you head into with the teammate CISO Summit. I appreciate your willingness to interview here, and really for being a partner in this, what we call this collaborative data journey, and allowing data-driven enterprises to really manage the data in a much more responsible way. Thank you very much, and wish you a good week.
Thank you very much. It will be an amazing week. We've got like 100 CISOs coming to Tel Aviv for this summit, so it'll be quite amazing. And like I said, I think this is a space that I am just fascinated by, so it's easy to help and work with you guys. So